you. I hope you can hear me. I'm going to do my best to share my screen, and there we go. So yeah, it's a great honor to be sharing this information with you today. Those of you who know the Lockeford Plant Materials Center, we're essentially a 100-acre farm, and since I've been here in California, a lot of our effort has been on working with cover crops. So I'm going to talk about, in 20 minutes, cover crop selection, try and narrow down what we've learned. This front cover has a few pictures from the PMC, and I'm going to go into how really you plan for cover crops and how you make your selection. And it's really critical to choose the right plants. But before you decide what you're going to plant, there's a lot of thought that has to go into it first. Cover crops are important for solving resource concerns, but you need to figure out what your resource concerns are. And so with this first slide, I put down, the basic 4 W's and an H, what, where, when, who, and how to think about first. In NRCS, we have developed a cover crop planning support tool, which lists a lot of these questions, and I have it here, but it's also in the chat, so you can have it in person. I don't want anybody to look at this, but the agronomists in California spend a lot of time thinking about this, the questions you need to ask before you can make a really good selection. And there's a lot of basic information. First, as I mentioned, resource concerns. Is soil compaction an issue? Do you want to control your weeds? Do you have nematodes? Do you want pollinators? All these things. You have to understand the cropping system that you're working with as well. Is it a perennial? A lot of our crops in California are tree crops. And even then, what is the tree crop? What are the needs of the crop? And of course, we have so many annual cropping systems as well. Tomatoes, rice, lettuce, all of these things. And with this question is, what's the window that you're going to need cover crops planted? And this can be fairly long. I mean, we're planting right now at the Plant Materials Center, and those cover crops will be, we hope, when it rains, they will germinate, and we will trap all the winter rains and produce a lot of organic matter in our soils and trap all the precipitation, winter precipitation, and those will be ready in March. So now we're talking, 6 months, but a cover crop window could, for example, if you were growing lettuce in the Salinas area, be as short as 6 months, 2 months, 60 days. So it just depends. You need to know which weeds are prevalent, how much of a problem are they? Are they going to compete with your cover crops so it can't get established, in which case you'll need to deal with them first, or is it maybe you don't care about them? And then what equipment do you have? And this is important for site preparation and so on. I'll go through this in a little more detail before we get to the selection. And finally, and critically important for California, what irrigation system do you have? Do you even have one? And where is there going to be water available to you to actually use on a cover crop? Because that will decide what you can do. So first of all, for site preparation and planting, is it going to be a no-till system, or will you be doing tillage? If you want to do a no-till, this will require a no-till drill, although you can in some cases do broadcasting, but a little less effective. And in that case, the prior operations that you may need could be mowing down of whatever is there, or using herbicide prior to the cover crop planting, then, or are you going to use tillage? And then you want to have a really nice firm seed bed to plant into. But the tillage operation is a lot of work, disking, harrowing, culture packing, which if you were in an annual cropping system, you might be doing anyway to set up your beds and put the cover crops on first, but maybe not. So all of those things to think about. You're planting too. Are you going to be direct drilling, either no-till or say with a grain seeder or something? What's available to you? Or will you be broadcasting? And I have pictures of 3 broadcast seeders, a drop seeder. It's actually a Brilliant. This is a little fertilizer spreader on the back of a quad or a belly grinder. And it's essential when you're planting that you have good soil to seed contact. So you need to, of course, you will get that with the Brilliant, but these other broadcast systems you're going to have to go over to try and make sure the seed is pressed down into the dirt. And then finally, irrigation and water availability. And will it be rain-fed entirely? Do you have an irrigation system? So this is a big question. In orchards, if you use drip, essentially you're not going to have any availability for additional water between trees. So you'll need to wait for natural rain, which of course is better in the northern part of the Central Valley than down in the San Joaquin Valley where there's less rain. You sort of have 2 systems there. You may get good growth under the trees where you have micro sprinklers, and there's a desert in the rows. How are you going to deal with that? Are there other plants that you could grow in the middles? Okay. And then how are you going to manage it? Because the cover crop requirements require some kind of termination method. So typically that's mowing or swathing. I personally like mowing because then you leave residue on the surface, and that kind of, especially in California, if you're growing cool season cover crops, you leave the residue on the surface. It's kind of a blanket over the summer, keeps the soil a little cooler. That's better for the microbial life of the soil, and you lose less water as well. But there are other options too. You could use hay or silage production. Of course, that is not compatible with NRCS cover crop practice, but I have seen it done. The roller crimper is widely used in the Midwest. I've seen that done here as well, but it's a little tricky to get right. You can disc under, and that is fine. I would say disking maybe when in the cooler part of the year, you can get that top material back into the soil, but I'm very leery of disking, say, at the beginning of the summer in the Central Valley because it's so hot, everything will oxidize. If you're growing a warm season cover crop, it will winter kill if you get adequate frost. So then you don't have to worry about termination. You'll just have some residue which will break down. Grazing is compatible with NRCS cover crop practices, and chemical herbicide is possible too. Now we come to selection. And this cover crop chart is actually taken from an ARS developed chart on periodic table, and to the so it breaks down into cool season and warm season charts. This one is a special one that we have done especially for California. We know all these cover crops grow well here, and there is a booklet on our website, and the link is there, which I don't know if you can click from there, but it's like a 45-page book, and each one of these little boxes with the plant has its own page with information about the different species. And the information includes how tall they'll grow, how much nitrogen you can expect to get from them, all these basic information that you need to make a good selection. So we include grasses, cool season, warm season grasses, broadleafs, and legumes. And of course, legumes are wonderful because they fix nitrogen and reduce the need for additional fertilizer systems. So I'm going to break it down just a little bit, the main components of cover crops that are used and why you need them. Firstly, cereals and grasses, and you can see from this picture they have wonderful fibrous root systems. They're great for soil building, they reduce erosion. When it rains, the water's going to run down the leaves and down into the roots, and you can see here on the slide They have wonderful root systems, in some cases very deep. This side here is actually in feet. Their roots in this case will go down to 7 feet or so. Depends on your soil type, of course, but you will increase water infiltration and water holding capacity of the soil. These are great nitrogen scavengers as well, so you're not going to be losing your nitrogen that you maybe put on over the year. It'll be caught by these grasses and then break down over the following year. Oops, that went a little faster than I intended, but now we're in the legumes, and they are wonderful for nitrogen fixation. And here, this is a fava bean, a bell bean. They do wonderfully well in California. Christopher, in the Plant Materials Center in Fallon, Nevada, they're doing work with bell beans, fava beans there also, so you can get them grown there. And this is crimson clover. And of course, the big thing with the legumes is that they fix nitrogen. So next page. Oh my goodness, what did I do here? This is a link that I didn't want. The next page. Brassicas and radish. This is really good. They have a very good taproot, and because of that, they reduce soil compaction. They scavenge nitrogen. They increase infiltration, they increase water holding capacity. And with some species, you can see these yellow leaves, yellow flowers here. Their bees and pollinators absolutely love them. The radishes can get really big. This is a photo here on the right, and you can see this is a good size radish. This is bringing in nitrogen and water. And because the roots are so deep, they can actually scavenge nitrogen from depth and bring it up. And when you mow them down and terminate them, that is available close to the surface of the soil. In our studies here at the PMC, we've been actually amazed at how much nitrogen is accumulated in the tillage radish. If your pollinators is your interest, there are lots of plants that are pollinators, and this is a few of them that we've grown here in California that are great. Most of these are actually cool season ones in this picture, but except for the sunflowers, of course, which are warm season. And you can grow safflower over the summer as well. Neither of these. Sunflower is native, and so is Great Valley Phacelia, but most of these plants are not. So then further questions to ask is, when most of our NRCS field office staff are working with producers, you need to be sure to know what they are looking for. What do they want, for example, with the height and growth habit and so on. You may need to ask probing questions, and that paper that we have posted for you will be helpful there. We've had experience of producers say, well, I want high nitrogen. You're like, okay, that's fine. We'll give you a high nitrogen biomass. You can fix maybe 150 pounds of nitrogen or more with this, but then it grows really big. It's like 5 or 6 feet tall, and the producer had an idea of something that was knee high, and that's not obviously going to work. So you need to be sure what they want, and if they do want high nitrogen and something only knee high, you perhaps tell them that's not really going to be possible. Maybe we can fix you 30 pounds of nitrogen or something, a little less. And then another question is, should it be a single species or a cover crop mix? And that will really depend upon circumstances. I think in like an organic cropping system, when they're growing a diversity of vegetables, single species cover crop is fine. You know, perhaps you're bringing in triticale or something which normally you're not growing, and that'll break disease cycles and bring in diversity, suppress weeds. But if it's something more complex, you might want to decide a mix. There are tools that you can use to help you with this. So NRCS has an e-veg guide. There's basic information on species and mixtures approved for California. I think the mixtures are particularly powerful. Have, you know, mixtures for vineyards and mixtures for other things that you might find good. The SARE, which is the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, has a lot of information. UC SAREP has a cover crop database. This is a little older, but it has very good basic information. They're also working on a cover crop selection tool. This is a beta version. I actually Googled it, and I think there's great hope with that as well. Another thing to do is ask your seed vendors. They are in the business of selling seed, and they know what grows in your area. So don't discount their knowledge, because they will want to sell you something that will actually grow, so you come back the next year. And then other local growers. When I'm riding around and driving places, I'm always looking out for cover crops. And if I see a good one, then I'll stop and see what's included so that I know how well they're doing. And that's always helpful. And there's nothing that beats good local knowledge. Something to think about is when you have decided what you want, you've made your selection, the ideal mix, you have to think, well, what size is the seed going to be? Because seed size is highly variable. And so on the left here, we have high biomass, big hunking seeds like, triticale and fava beans, peas, and so on. But if you're growing a pasture mix with clover and rye, it's very small. This is a mustard mix, and you see how much smaller it is. And then the pollinator seed mix is smallest of all. So if you just have a grain drill, that'll be, maybe you can get all this through here, but the smaller seed will be a problem. So the equipment you have for planting must be compatible with the seed size that you're going to be planting. And the seed size determines the optimum planting depth. So these high biomass covers, would maybe go an inch or so deep, whereas these would be perhaps quarter or even, half an inch, and this would be quarter an inch. So the seeding depth is important, and that's something to think about as well. So final considerations, a quick review. Have you considered the resource concerns and needs of the producer? Is the cover crop choice realistic? Will the equipment be available? And is your management plan compatible with the crop? And then two things. Cover cropping is short term. This can be 60 days up to 6 months. So what are you going to learn from this so you can do better next year? And I think that's a big thing with cover cropping. It requires ongoing learning, innovation. Your soil health will improve as you do it. And then you may want to tweak your cover crops and change it over time. So, thank you. Any questions?
Great, thank you, Margaret. There is a question in the chat. Your photo shows an annual mustard in perennial crop walnuts. Does NRCS support this, or should it be just perennial type cover crops?
Yeah, they do report it. They do support it. Wait a minute. Here we go. No, absolutely. The cover crop practice is an annual practice. We also have conservation cover, which is a 5-year practice. And so, yeah, we are supporting annual cover cropping in tree crops. Absolutely. And there's other organizations like the Seeds for Bees program and so on that will support using pollinator species, particularly in tree crops. And mustard is an awesome pollinator species.
Great, thank you. There was another inquiry. Somebody asked what was the name of that resource that provides details of the cover crop, and I do see that there are 2 resources posted in our chat there. So Valerie posted those. So if anybody would like those resources, there's a link there in the chat, just something to be aware of. And then another question. So are there any cover crop recommendations for soils with high salinity?
Yes, but off the top of my head, maybe we can table that to Valerie's. I mean, I think there are certain ones like beets do very well. Barley supposedly does better in high salinity. Yeah, the Chenopodiaceae usually do pretty good. But it's tough, yes. But yeah, there are some things. Maybe sweet clover as well. I'm not quite sure about that.
This is Valerie. Yeah, first it depends what the salinity levels are in the soil. I mean, if they're off the chart, you're not going to get much of anything to grow, but it depends on the ranges that it's at. So if you have a soils report, it's a lot easier to help figure out what would be appropriate. But usually barley and triticale, what Margaret mentioned, are the more salt tolerant species generally.
Very good. All right. Any other questions? Give it a few seconds here.
Yeah, I'm amazed. So few questions. That's interesting.
So this is Brandy, and I have one from from a planner's perspective. There are a lot of producers that we help with cover crops, and even ones that we don't, but are reaching out to us for grain drills, and specifically native seed drills. And I know this may be more of a localized effort, but are you guys aware at the Plant Materials Center of any efforts to facilitate the rental or the services of somebody with a grain drill or a native seed drill?
We have heard about this as a major problem for implementation of cover crops for a while. And I have heard of certain resource conservation districts that have had drills that can be rented, but that it has been a problem because people alter the drills a little bit and they come back and they're broken and they're not working. Or, you know, seed drills are kind of tricky to keep them working well. They need somebody knowledgeable so that, you know, they can, you know, that they can fix them if they break and so on. So we've heard about it as a major problem. The solution is really not very clear. One of the issues is that, you know, everybody wants to be planting at the same time as well. This is another thing. This is ideal planting time for cover crops. So it's a major problem and I don't really have a solution. I have heard it mentioned that it's too bad that, you know, in NRCS in California supports purchasing new tractors for air quality, but we do not support purchasing grain drills so that cover crops could be planted. You know, what can I say?
Right, good, okay. Yes, it is an issue, so maybe we can pool our resources with our CDs a little more effectively there in the future to support our producers. Thank you for that answer. We have Johnny with his hand raised, so I believe he has a question. If you do, Johnny, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I went ahead and typed it in the meeting chat. Margaret, I mean, I personally grow some organic almonds. What can we plant in there? I'm here. You know how hard it is to get nitrogen in our organic crops. What would you suggest for something like that, and where can we get that seed? And then secondly, if I just may comment about the tractors, that's for PM. We're not buying farmers' tractors. We're addressing a PM resource concern. So if you can spin the grain drill to Carlos, that's kudos to you.
Well, actually, you probably could, you know, because if you have vegetation on the soil, it's going to be less particulate matter, I would have thought, but it is a little bit of a stretch. Oh, Johnny, gosh, you know, in your area, I would talk to the seed producers. We actually have a vendor list on our website, but you know, the two that come to mind, Campress Seed and Lockeford Seeds, both very good, very knowledgeable. For almonds, if clovers would grow in your area, which clovers can be a little tricky, you know, they sometimes need a little more water, but they're really great for almonds and you know, a mixed clover mix, and that is going to be low growing. Don't have to worry about the frost too much in spring. You can mow them once or twice if you were worried around the frost, and assuming they would grow, they're not always great everywhere, but they would fix nitrogen, they wouldn't grow too big. You know, peas and vetch and brassicas, depends what height you want your cover crop.
Well, I'm not so terribly concerned about that. I have a flailer, but what the problem is really CCOF certification. You've got to have certified organic seed, and I think we have problems finding the clovers. About the best thing we can get is from Lockwood, is that I think there's some vetch and bell beans and a few, maybe some barley and stuff like that. But yeah, that's the whole problem is, and I appreciate everybody's comments, the problem is getting certified seed that will pass CCOF or your certifier's, you know, standards.
Right. Yeah, that's the organic people.
Cheryl, would you pop on? And here I see you're saying there's an exemption for cover crop. I haven't seen that.
Hi, Johnny. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't mean to horn in on this. I know that when I was working with some almond growers over there in Madeira, that there is kind of a waiver that you can get if organic cover crop seed isn't available, as long as you're getting untreated seed, then I believe that's acceptable. You'll have to check with your CCOF person, but I know a couple of people who are organic certified and couldn't get organic cover crop seed. And so they were able to get a waiver, though, that allowed them to use a commercial seed as long as it wasn't treated.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. And basically anything is good, Johnny, as long as it grows.
Great questions, great conversation. Thank you, everybody. All right. Do we have any more questions? A couple seconds here. Okay, I don't see any more hands raised. So at this point, I would like to thank you, Margaret, for your great presentation, and we would like to turn it over to Mr. Rob Roy for our